Hello, friends, and welcome back. My name is Sergio, and I am the handler for Mayday's Delta Green campaign, Doomed to Repeat. With me again is the Asa Darabondi of handlers, Black Project Gaming's Vince. How are you, friend?
Hey man, good to be here. Glad to be back, and of course, glad to have everyone tuning in. If this is your first time on our channel, welcome to you. We're part of Mayday Roleplay. We play tabletop role-playing games like Delta Green, obviously. And God, let me tell you, we got more coming. Down the pike.
In fact, I think by the time this airs, our second season of Orpheus will already be out.
So needless to say, there is something for everyone, and all of it is available in podcast or video format, completely free. So check it out. On top of that, though, we've got our Patreon. We got to plug the Patreon, and man, let me tell you, it's been business is a booming. With our Discord, I would be challenged to find a crazier corner of the internet than our Discord. Let me tell you, the discussions we get into there, it's great. You talk about found family and linking up with new friends and organizing games. I mean, it doesn't get much better than our Discord. So that alone is worth the price of admission. But then on top of that, Caleb is going to be releasing one-on-one sessions for Vampire the Masquerade. I'll probably have some content coming out for Orpheus, and then you get amazing videos like the supplementary material to our guide to impossible landscapes, which we're going to discuss today. So there you have it.
Absolutely. Love it. Amazing. Now, if you've watched our first two episodes, then you know that there is no way out but through. So I'd like everyone to open your red books to page 616 and read along, because you found The Dead Drop, a guide to running impossible landscapes. Vince, in our previous episode, we went over the Night Floors, the introductory scenario for Impossible Landscapes. And while it is a doozy, it pales in comparison to the next chapter, A Volume of Secret Faces. This episode, we'll be discussing the first half of this scenario. There is so much to talk about that we had to split it in two. We'll cover what I see as the holy trinity of this scenario, Operation India Moon, exploring the Dorchester House, and eventually involving Delta Green. I've read the scenario for the first time. I'll be approaching our discussion like a handler who is got those first questions. Lots of dumb questions that we hope Vince will spin into illuminating answers. We've also received our first listener question that we will be getting to eventually. Those of you tuning in, if you have questions about the campaign, you can submit them to us, and we will answer them in the next episode, or the soonest episode. Finally, as a warning, big-time spoilers ahead. If you are a player in Impossible Landscapes, you need to make like Abigail Wright and disappear. But if you're interested in running or currently running this campaign, welcome to the show. Okay, Vince, getting past all of my Impossible Landscape puns.
Love it.
We need to talk about it. What is A Volume of Secret Faces about?
So, where to begin? So, long story short, A Volume of Secret Faces is the next phase in the characters, the agents' inevitable descent into and towards Carcosa. It picks up 20 years later. So 20 years after the Night Floors, in 2015, we find the players brought together again by an unusual summons to meet with an agent calling himself Exeter in Boston, Massachusetts, to look into the disappearance of several ostensibly Delta Green agents that had been committed to the Dorchester House psychiatric facility. And from there, kind of that inevitable discovery that they have not left the night world behind. And if anything, the Yellow King is just beckoning them deeper into that miasma and morass of unnatural influence.
Mm-hmm. And we begin kind of right at the end. Something we did not bring up at the end of the last episode is that the book encourages you to have a couple of home pursuits with the players to show this passage of 20 years.
It does, yeah. So the assumption is that the players will, of course, have remained with Delta Green during this 20-year gap in some way, shape, or form. And so part of that is, honestly, it's kind of a way to hit the fast forward button. This gap is a great place to kind of introduce other scenarios you may want to run with your players if you're planning on doing a long, more drawn-out campaign. Throw some new scenarios in there that to kind of show the passage of time, show what they've been up to in that gap between Night Floors and Volume. Otherwise, you can do what I did, which is we just went right into it and we ran these home scenes. So long story short, when it comes to this transitional period, you've got essentially you choose 1 to 2 damaged veteran packages, hard experience, adapted to violence, helplessness, that kind of thing, and then things man was not meant to know. You'll choose 3 home pursuits. There are some rule changes, like for instance, you'll get a 20% bonus to each roll, and you'll double the gains and the losses in any bond and sanity roll.
I guess that's to make up for the massive amount of time. It doesn't make sense you'd only have 3 home pursuits in 20 years, so I guess that would make sense.
Exactly, yeah. So while you're only technically choosing 3 home pursuits, the bonuses are kind of, in this case, doubled to show, to kind of show that wider expanse of time.
There is an interesting element, which is the Estranged Bonds. The scenario suggests that they lose a bond and then gain a new one. Can you go into some detail about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone will essentially lose 1 bond due to alienation, betrayal, or death. So something the book suggests is that you take your agents, your players' bonds, and you ascribe symptoms to them. They refer to it as poison bonds. So, for example, if it's a romantic relationship, an example being a spouse or a significant other, some of the suggested symptoms are accusatory, addicted, jaded, or cheating, to kind of show how that relationship has degraded over time. And there's a few other examples in there too that give you a great starting off point. So you'll ascribe those symptoms to kind of explain how that relationship deteriorated over those next 20 years. Most interestingly, though, 1 bond of the handler's choice will actually die in mid-2007 from either an accidental overdose, a car accident, a mugging gone wrong, or suicide. An agent will gain a new bond with the same score, so it's not a complete and total loss that sets them up for failure moving forward. But it's something to further connect them to the lore of Impossible Landscapes, because in 2007, if I'm not mistaken, I'd have to go back through the history of the document, a play ended up being put on in Chicago that was essentially a new telling of The King in Yellow. And so another little tie there, tying the agent into that play, into the Yellow King himself, and showing that it had effects beyond just that individual and to their closest bonds.
There are so many clues that link to other clues in this that I didn't think it was possible to write something like this. It's really interesting, and maybe we should kind of get into it now because it does relate to the question that was submitted. One of our patrons named Martha Makes, they had a question regarding all of these extra bits and bobs that you can find in this scenario. Researching Dr. Barbas, researching the staff of the Dorchester House. There are so many avenues you can go down, and I think it seems like the experience of a lot of handlers is the players will miss the majority of this. Martha had a question specifically: how might you empower the players so that they don't lose or they don't miss some of this information? What could you do as a handler to ensure that they at least have been given every opportunity possible to look deeper into some of these clues?
That's a really good question. Honestly, when it comes down to it, I let the players drive the train. This can be as kind of rapid a descent as they want, or it can be as long and meandering as they desire. At the end of the day, if some of these little tidbits are not crucial story bits, they're more like, the way I've always viewed it, it's kind of like Viscid, right? If you look at Viscid, which is another Debt Willer scenario, you have that whole Jordan Springs storage, component to the operation where the players could end up following down that Anseal Incorporated rabbit hole and end up finding this majestic treasure trove that is also rigged to frickin' explode if they try to break in. But when I ran that, my players didn't go anywhere near Jordan Springs. I will also say it might be useful to have a player, or choose one of the players, depending on their background and what kind of character they're playing, have been involved or in some way connected to the majestic Delta Green War that kicked off in the late 90s, early 2000s, to again kind of play up that paranoia. Somebody who's aware that they're in the Cowboys. Like, that's the whole point of the campaign, is the players are supposed to be in the Cowboys, or the Outlaws at this point. So, another area of paranoia, like, you withstood the destruction of Delta Green, by insidious forces both inside and out. So, having a player that maybe in this 20 years time span has become more paranoia. I mean, shit. If you have a player who chooses paranoia as some kind of disorder or something along those lines, that's your golden ticket to exploit some of these little red, not necessarily red herrings, but you know what I mean.
Those are two excellent points. I forgot all about the fact that the era this takes place in, they should be at the height of their paranoia.
Yep.
Okay, so I think we've gotten through that difficult first hurdle of thinking about how do you approach this. Let's get into the actual story here. Where do you want to start in terms of how the players might approach this?
So the whole thing kicks off with each agent that was connected to the night floors receiving an invitation at their residence. How you want to play this, because I got similar questions, and I realized handlers have gotten very similar questions from their players. Were the agents all in the same cell over these past 20 years? Were they scattered to the wind in different cells and are just now being brought back together? I'd say it's entirely up to you. Again, this might be a little avenue for you to use to kind of play up the unusual nature of this operation. If these are people who haven't seen each other in 10, 15 plus years, and now all of a sudden they're working together again, that's something that gets them scratching their heads. So we received the invitation to the Gateway Bridges restaurant, and if you'll remember, deep cut, the napkin upon which we found the scribe and the lion, the schematics sketched on, were GBR napkins, which did not exist in 1995, and now in 2015 the agents are being invited to that restaurant by Exeter.
Do you usually leave the clues with the players, like the handouts and stuff?
Yes.
I know you run it online and stuff like that, but do you find that they often just will look back at it?
Yeah, it's funny. I had like a specific handout folder set up in Discord where I would just drop those things in there, and it was funny. Sometimes it would just over their head, and then one day somebody would just be scrolling through and be like, holy shit, wait a second. But other times I would have to call for an intelligence, or specifically when the players actually ended up face to face with the line, and it was like, you remember seeing something like this on a napkin 20 years ago. So yeah, sometimes you gotta hit them over the head with it. But with the invitation itself, what's interesting about that is you can study the writing depending on your art skills. You can examine the writing with forensics, examine the paper stock. Again, depends on how paranoid your players are. But then if they rip apart the paper, they find this hidden exemplar in the back, which is very strange. But then it has the symbol or the sigil of who is it? Of Person, which the agents first ran into or would have encountered in Abigail Wright's apartment in the night floors. So again, more doesn't necessarily lead anywhere, but it's more indications of something weird is going on.
Yeah, I think the players finding that Ars Goetia as soon as possible will really open it up to them. I feel like handlers should try to encourage that they find it as soon as possible.
As long as they read it. As long as they read it.
That's true. That's true.
So one of the first things I gave my players when they went into the night floors was that one of the manifestations is two arms that are alluded to belonging to Dr. Barbas. Exit a door and drop a box in the hallway, and then close the door and disappear. Inside is the Hygromantia, which is like another version of the Ars Goetia. So it would be something that they would have access to that could do that. So you can give it to them early. They just got to read the damn thing. But yeah, So long story short, they get the invitation and they are called inevitably to the Gateway Bridges restaurant where they meet with Dr. Barbas, who introduces himself as Agent Exeter. And then there's a couple of avenues you could use to kind of find out who you're dealing with, but we'll get to that.
Do you just introduce his actual name, or I mean, because I feel like an actual handler, or excuse me, a case officer might try to hide their name as best as possible. How did you handle it?
Yeah, so I just had him introduced as Exeter. He's stayed with Exeter, this is also weird, right? Is if you're familiar with the Delta Green lore, especially with the cell structure, most of the times agents are only going to have contact with the cell immediately before and immediately after their letter. So in the case of M cell, they would ostensibly only have access or only have contact with L cell and N cell. For them to have access to somebody with the name Exeter, implying that they're a part of E cell, way outside of typical OPSEC measures. So another indicator this is fucking weird.
I was wondering, going along the lines of, again, getting them to look at those clues that they might not think of. If Exeter is paying for the lunch or something like that, he could always make a mistake, like put a credit card down, or in opening his wallet, there's a business card that maybe says a name. I just feel like getting his name to them would be beneficial, as it leads to so many things.
It absolutely does. Yeah. So if they decide to do surveillance beforehand, they'll see him arrive in his vehicle. They can run the license plate using the records they have access to and identify him as Dr. Barbas. Because the implication here is that Dr. Barbas is already compromised. He's already insane. So if he slips up and makes a mistake, then hey, make a search roll to spot the last name of the credit card he lays down.
Right. And with all of this discussion of like cluing in your players as much as possible, I do have to say that the reveal that all of this is just a complete ruse of the King in Yellow is such a satisfying reveal that it really is kind of a delicate balance of doing this. But I do think the players will have to go pretty far down the rabbit hole before they realize that it's all basically a ruse. But it's definitely worth kind of holding your cards as best you can.
100%. I totally agree. But once they meet with Exeter, with Barbas, the whole objective, the whole task that they're presented with is that they are to investigate the disappearance of however many agents. The book suggests that you pare the list down to the exact number of agents that you have at the table. The intent being to sow some confusion as to were these missing agents all along? Were they always patients in Dorchester? All of that.
As eventually we'll get into Dorchester, where they can't escape and they are suddenly the patients.
Exactly. Yeah. The connection to the night floors, though, comes when, as Exeter is explaining their disappearance, he shows them a footage or an image of a message left in one of their cells, which says, "Abigail Wright has gone to sea, crossed the waves to rescue me in a ship both tall and fine. She rounds the corner marking time." So, of course, the allusion to Abigail Wright, who they never found in 95. It's that automatic hook to bring them back in and make them realize that they didn't leave the McAllister building too far behind.
One thing that we might want to cover, though, is the importance of Dr. Barbas. I mean, it really is kind of key that if you get into him, you can learn sooner or later that he is either insane or a member of the court of the King in Yellow, where he is unwittingly helping. There's really a lot to learn by kind of looking into him.
There is. And the way it happened with my players is obviously once we exited a volume of Secret Faces and moved on to like a map made of skin, it was obvious that they were led there. It was a trap. All their suspicions about it not being legitimate were correct. It kind of verified all of their worst kind of paranoid thoughts about what was going on. So it was at that point they decided to look into Barbas, because that was the origin point for them. And so that's what led them back to his place. I could see players, following him home after they meet with him at the restaurant. Like, because if you've got all night and you're not going to be going to Dorchester until the morning, they might be proactive and think, something's weird about this. Let's follow this guy. They follow him home, and then there's a whole bit about what you see when you conduct surveillance on his house, waiting until he leaves, breaking in, all the items you can find there. So there's ways to go about it. This is, while some would, I would say incorrectly argue that Impossible Landscapes is very railroady. These early scenarios are still very much player driven, and the direction they go and how quickly you get there.
Yeah, so let's say they go the digital route. I believe there's an email correspondence that they can have with the detective that worked with Dr. Barbas, Emmeline Scahan. Am I pronouncing that name?
Yeah, Scahan, I believe, or Scahan. Yeah.
So that's one avenue of kind of learning that he's maybe lost it a little bit or things like that.
Yeah, so that's if they decide to actually look into Barbas. That's if they decide to actually start looking into his name, researching his connection to law enforcement. Of course, they'll find out that he's with the Massachusetts State Police. They can pull strings to get his personnel records, but they'll eventually find out that he was kind of on a leave of absence as a result of his encounter with Emmeline Scahan, the detective.
Right, they had an altercation.
Yeah, she saw him writing on a piece of thick tan paper with an old-looking pen. She's worried for his sanity. He was completely deranged. In June of 2015, she entered his office unannounced, and he attacked her, and that's kind of what led to his leave of absence.
And then where does the state trooper Michael Dawkin come into play? Is he the investigator of that incident, or how is he connected?
So he's just since Barbas is with the state police, he's just a state trooper who has worked with him for the past 4 years. So somebody who's had some interaction with him that may be able to speak to his declining mental state.
And probably the two most important things about Barbas, I would say, is that he built the scribe and he built the lion, those two things that you can find in his home. Because really all of this is just a warning to the players.
Yes.
Barbas is compromised, and what you're walking into is going to most likely be some kind of a trap.
100. Yep, absolutely.
But let's say they fall for that trap and they go to the Dorchester House. Just like the night floors, they have to go at night. And I assume that could be a problem with very paranoid players. What are some methods you recommend, or that the book might recommend, to get them in there at night?
So, my players, God love them, they're just like, hey, let's spend the night after day one. So it was like, okay, well, I don't have to get you here at all. So they actually have a section in the book called Getting Agents into Dorchester House After Dark, which is great. There's a lot of great hints in there. So the first recommendation is to simply stall. Play up that, there are secret areas that may exist within the Dorchester House facility itself that they can't get to. Kind of feed them red herrings to keep them kind of roped in. Have time pass, depending on who they talk to, what they look for, where they go, to where eventually it's like, hey, you look up and it's, you guys have been here all day. Like, what did you think was going to happen? We're at night now. Or that, the idea that a particularly out of the way area might be a good hiding spot for people to kind of hide out until the heat dies down. So maybe that's where the missing agents are at. Something along those lines. Then you have false calls. If somebody is getting, if you've got a team that splits up, maybe they start, one half of the team starts getting calls from the other half saying they're trapped in the Dorchester House, come get them, and then it all kind of brings them in. One is kind of just the proverbial, rock over the head where you just have them sedated during the day and kept there until it's dark. And then the one that I think would probably be one of the most effective, because understandably the disappearance of Abby and not being able to find her in the night floors is probably like a sticking point for a lot of both the players and the characters, right? Like this is something they weren't able to resolve. So have one of the patients just absentmindedly mention that Abby lives in Dorchester House at night. And kind of rope them in back that way. So it's like, okay, we got to come back at night, find Abby, and then.
Although observant players should be able to recognize the pattern of at night things are different here, and so they should almost have or be anticipating that, whether they're avoiding it at night or whether they realize the only way to get answers is we got to go at night.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think if you've got particularly like paranoid and stubborn players who just are not going to stay, after a few days, maybe they are finally jumped and they are finally sedated, or, the corruption from the night world has reached such a point where time no longer works right in the Dorchester House, and when it feels like 15 minutes, it's really been 5 hours, and now it's nighttime. So something along those lines.
So really, the staff and the patients are all kind of clues into letting the agents know this is a source of the corruption. This is a way to get into the night floors again. Anything else really important that needs to be known about these folks, or should we get into just the fact that these players are meant to get stuck in here?
Yeah, I would say the big thing to play up, especially once the players get stuck in there at night, is that they need to make contact with Bael, because Bael is going to lead them to the next phase. So whether that's through Mr. Wild, whether that's through Sunshine, whether it's through any one of the other patients, have the intent should be to always steer them towards Bael, towards communicating with Bael.
With that said, I mean, they're supposed to be trapped here. It should feel like some serious time has passed. I think at least, 24 to 48 hours before they get that clue. So I would say maybe, let some of the staff and the patients really screw with them before you get that tidbit of head to Bael.
Yep, absolutely. We had some group therapy sessions with Dr. Maximo Friend. They got introduced to the Cotton Candy Room, which was a particularly, if you were to ask me for one of my favorite set pieces, that'd be one of them. The Cotton Candy Room, where the Patzu is extracted from the eye. The group therapy session was really cool.
The Patzu will become important later, but you're suggesting make them live a day or two of a patient's life here at the Dorchester House.
Yeah, I didn't do that. I kind of, again, we were all gas, no brakes for a little bit there. But yeah, play it up, especially if you've got time and it's just something you're trying to draw out. When time doesn't matter so much anymore, having it do all sorts of weird and wacky things where it just doesn't really matter, and sometimes 5 minutes have passed and it feels like 5 hours, or 5 hours it's only been 5 minutes. Continually mess with them. Play up the surreal nature of the campaign for sure. Okay,
so they find him. He suggests that they should watch a play, correct?
Yeah, he leads them down into a part of the Dorchester House, which is essentially the basement, if I'm not mistaken. And leads them to a theater where they sit and watch this play. The clown that, if astute players recognized from the very beginning of the Night Floors, there was the child-sized clown dancing with the paper dragon. They're seeing that happen once again on this stage. It's the child clown dancing with the dragon, and of course, depending on the corruption levels, Bael can explain different facets of the King in Yellow lore to them about what the play and what the dance is representing. But eventually he's going to instruct them, like, the Patzu is the key. You got to drink the Patzu to disappear.
And it'll be offered at the end of the play, right? The clown, I believe, has a vial or something like that?
Yes, yeah. He'll drag the paper dragon out. He rips it open, and inside is a thermosized glass container filled with that Patzu oil. It's identical, to what they've seen referred to as Patzu. Bael will twist it off. He'll say the Patzu is the way out, and he'll drink it and disappear. And that's when the fun begins. The tiny clown gets bigger, and then will chase the players. Will chase the agents, and will one-hit kill them if you're not careful, which is what happened to
literally just like boop them on the nose, and they just turn into so much Patzu.
Right, yeah, they literally explode. I lost 2 players during this chase sequence. So 2 of my 4 died during this sequence.
Let me ask you this about the chase. How do you handle the fact that, at the end of the play, the clown is probably either on stage or maybe they run off stage, however you want to handle it? How do you imply that threat before the players, to give the players enough time? How do you warn them that this is about to be bad? Sure, a clown walking up to you creepily is weird, but how do you really imply that threat of you need to get away from this thing?
Definitely, like with each step it takes towards you, it gets bigger, because it's supposed to get bigger and bigger. The going from a small childlike clown to something now towering and massive, bigger than your tallest agent, and kind of looming menacingly, playing up that sense of menace, that sense of threat.
Maybe it's in its body language as well. It's maybe cracking its knuckles, or it's coming towards you like it wants to touch you with its hands. And
like a more feral kind of posture. It's crouching down some because of its height, and its fingers are long. Just something to, to really, to me, feral is like the first word that would come to mind, is like play up that kind of feral nature.
I like that idea. You could even have, because I believe it's wearing a mask, right?
It is.
I like the idea of even hearing growling or something coming from behind the mask. It suddenly is changing. I like that there's a little note that another player can drink the Patzu of one of the other players that just exploded, but will suffer from helplessness.
Yep, exactly. Exactly, yeah.
So you can have that scary clown chase sequence here.
Oh, God, yeah. It's an intense sequence, and it should be. There's a lot of different little areas you can highlight, like the shifting nature of backstage. They catch different glimpses at different times. But long story short, the Patzu kind of disappears and reappears over and over again. After someone drinks it, it'll be gone, but then it'll reappear. So essentially, they got to make a luck roll, and if they fail, the liquid is not there, or they simply can't drink it. They're too engaged in escaping. But if they succeed, then they can drink it, and then they immediately disappear.
Is there anything else about this moment, which seems to be kind of the climax of the scenario, that is important to understand? It sounds like it's basically get the players into the Dorchester House, make them feel helpless as they are trapped, and then reveal the only way out.
Absolutely, yeah. It's starting to really reemphasize the whole underlying objective of this whole campaign. The only way out is through, and it's a great avenue for them to kind of really realize, that sinking realization that everything they thought they left behind in 1995 with the destruction of the McAllister, it never left.
Okay, the players survive, they make it out, they drink the Patzu. What happens next to them?
They wake back up in
a totally random house, I believe. In
a totally random house, yeah. In a unoccupied residential area, in an unoccupied home.
I got the impression the home was for sale, like there was a real estate tag and stuff like that on it.
Yeah, it's still in Boston. It's like a residential area, but yeah, there's like a for sale sign out front. When they wake up, the first thing they see is another sigil from the Ars Goetia for Malthus this time. Of course, at this point, when agents are in the night worlds, they don't sustain any temporary insanity or anything like that. But if they did go temporarily insane, or they did hit their breaking point, that all comes home to roost the second they're back in the real world. I
love the idea of like 3 or 4 agents all hitting their breaking points at the same time. So like neighbors can hear people screaming in this empty house. Maybe the police are called. Who knows how bad it can get? Yeah,
that's exactly. Yeah, it can get real bad. Which is amazing. I love how bad it can get. But the next big part, the next big lead happens when this entity called the Clockwork Child, that the agents may or may not have encountered in the night floors, essentially is on the front step of the residence with this letter, with this note.
Also, specifically, the door, it's right there.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep. In fact, it'll appear to the agent with the highest corruption rating in a manner in which it is visible only to them. Out a window, reflection in a mirror, or a shadow in a hall that only the agent can see, something like that. So it'll come to them, it'll approach them, it'll have this note.
That's a pretty good suggestion, is for when they are in the Dorchester House, they should come across the Clockwork Child, because then it will be obvious that this is a connection.
Yeah. If they didn't encounter it in the night floors, have it appear at some point in time in Dorchester House for sure, or just have it kind of continuously show up again and again. Absolutely, just an implication that this thing is connected to all of this. But it'll approach with the note that'll essentially direct the players to find the hotel brothel bin, find J.C. Lynn's, bring him his bottle, and it will be signed by Abigail Wright.
So the tracks are laid for the next scenario. Find Hotel Broadlebin, like you said, find the writer to give them the bottle. But there is a lot left to discuss about this scenario. There's the entire involvement with Delta Green that we haven't even gotten into yet. I think now is probably a good time to take a break, and in the next episode we'll go into some of those details. We'll go into more details about a lot of these NPCs and this whole involvement of Delta Green and how you would handle it. But this was really illuminating and kind of helped put into perspective how you are going to handle this big scenario.
It's a beast. It takes a lot of reading, a lot of prep, a lot of kind of connecting the dots and making sure you've laid the groundwork to make it as kind of seamless an experience as possible. But it's doable. And it's such a great scenario. It's such a great experience for the players.
So we're going to talk about all this stuff in the next episode. We'll go into more detail. Folks, if you are enjoying it, please subscribe to us. Our Patreon is available at patreon.com/MaydayRP, where you can find lots of stuff. These Patreon exclusive episodes that we are offering in tandem with these free episodes have maps and images from the book and details that you are not going to find in the free version. So please be sure to sign up at any patron level, which will get you access to these more in-depth exclusive episodes. Vince, thanks again. I'll see you on the other side.
Thanks for having me, man. We'll be seeing you.